Thanks for being here. So I'm glad to be here to talk about designing great progressive web apps. So I want to start by asking you a question. Why doesn't the web feel good? Have you noticed that when you're scrolling throughout a mobile website, the experience is not as perfect as a native app? So there are lots of mobile web problems that are happening. The average load on a mobile website is around 19 seconds. That's a lot if you're scrolling on mobile web all day. And have you noticed that sometimes the scrolling is very slow or it lags? So there are lots of unresponsive situations on mobile web. Sometimes the content jumps when you're scrolling throughout a website, which is really frustrating. It's a frustrating experience. And sometimes when you're browsing a website on mobile, you tap on an image by mistake, and then it loads the next page, and then you have to wait another 19 seconds to load in order for it to come back to the previous page. So the user doesn't really feel in control when they're browsing a mobile website. So I'm here to tell you that the web can feel good, and not just good, but great, with progressive web apps. I always wanted to use this effect. So let me start by introducing myself. I'm Nicole, and I'm a UI UX designer, and I'm also a design teacher at L'Oagon, which is a coding bootcamp that teaches web development in 9 weeks. So let me refresh your memories a bit if you don't know this already. What makes an app a PWA? So first, a PWA is fast. It loads quickly, performs smoothly. That's because of service workers and the best practices for performance. A progressive web app is progressive. It's supercharged in modern browsers, which means it works anywhere, everywhere, and you can enhance the experience for devices that support more advanced features. Hence the term progressive enhancement. A progressive web app is connectivity independent, and that's one of the most important features of a progressive web app. It works offline, and it works with low-end connections. So no matter what the internet is, it should work perfectly. A progressive web app is engaging. Users are more likely to use a PWA rather than a mobile website due to the fact that you could install it to the home screen and have push notifications, which increases the conversions and increases the engagement. And there are lots of companies and big brands that are using progressive web apps. 5 Miles shoppers spend 20% more time browsing through products than they did on their previous site. The Weather Channel saw an 80% improvement in the load time after shipping PWAs. And there are lots and lots of more companies that had great conversions and engagement with their PWA. You can find more stats on pwastats.com. So now the real question is, how can we design great progressive web apps? So let's divide the three most important features of a PWA. A PWA is app-like. It should feel like a native app that is local on your phone. PWA is engaging. It should be responsive with the user's input and very fast. And a PWA is resilient. It's reliable. It works perfectly with any internet connection. So throughout this talk, I'm going to give you some UX and technical recommendations to make great progressive web apps. Let's start by the first section. How can we have a more app-like experience? Your PWA should meet the user's expectations as if it's a native app. So the design should be like a native app. And the common mistake for designers or front-end developers is to design web-like components for PWAs, as if it's like a normal website. So the first thing we need to do is take some UX inspiration from native apps. So in order to match the user's mental model of a native app, we need to design more app-like components for our PWA. So we can do that by browsing sites like patterns.com or dribble.com and get inspired from sections that are related to native apps. So patterns.com is a place where you could get inspired from mobile design patterns. You could choose Android, iOS, or more, and you could browse some components, and it's also divided into categories. Another thing we can do is level up our familiarity with material design. Because users expect the design and interaction and everything around your PWA to be engaging and functioning like a native app. So familiarize yourself with material design principles, things like the interactions, the animations, the colors, and everything around the principles of material design. You could do that on material.io. What you can do also is use material design components. MDC is a framework by Google, which is modular and customizable UI components. And the nice thing about MDC is that it's modular, which means you could choose the components you want to use and use them only. You don't have to download the whole framework. So some components are like ripple animations, cards, colors, grid, everything around material design. Remember that your app will sit next to the other native apps on your home screen, which means it has to have some requirements for your app icon in order for it to look good. So the first thing we need to do is that your app icon should visually match the other app icons around it. So there are some visual standards that it should match, like formats, sizes. Another thing is to create a responsive icon that can work on any sizes. Because remember, your PWA will be accessed throughout so many different devices and sizes and platforms. So the best thing to do this, the best way to design a responsive icon is to make it as simple as possible. So your icon should be a very unique shape that is very simple with no complicated vectors and no words, no characters, and it should look good on all sizes. Because your icon will be on the splash screen, on the app install banner, on the task switcher, notification banner. So make sure to test all these. Also, make sure your app icon looks good on all platforms. So as I said, there are many formats for each icon on different devices and different platforms. For example, on iOS, the icons can't be transparent. They require a background color. And if you do it as a circle, this will happen. It will have some background border, black border. So it needs to be a solid square. And there are lots of other formats that should be considered. And the best way to see all these is to use a generator like RealFabric on generator.net. This is where you could see all of the variations in one go, and it lets you make adjustments for each platform. Then, after you're done, it generates a manifest.json for you. So this is a nice and quick way to design your icon. Another way to brand our app is to use the theme color. So the theme color gives the brand and uniqueness for our PWA, and it's what makes it more like a native app. So there are two types of theme colors. The first one is the browser theme color. This is the theme color that you see when you open it from a browser. So you could use the primary or accent color, whatever color that works with your app. And this is how we do it. So we add a meta tag in the head, we add a name theme color, and a value in the content. The second one is the app theme color. This is the color that you could see when you open the app via home screen, after you add it to home screen. So as you can see here, the same color is on the task switcher as well in the header. And the status bar is kind of automatically colored from that color. They just make it darker. And this is how we do. So we add the theme color to the app manifest, with the theme color and the value. Another way to meet the user's expectations is to also consider that there are also bigger screens than mobile. So of course, when designing PWA, you always start thinking about mobile first. But we also need to consider other sizes, other screens. So we're doing a PWA, which means it should work anywhere, everywhere. So why not just also make it work on desktops and laptops? So this is like an extra step that we should take. And this the OutWeb website, the PWA, is a perfect example of that. They used the same exact design of the mobile site and just made it a bit bigger. This is a great example of a PWA. So let's move on to the next section. How can we make progressive web apps that are engaging? So we need to be responsive to the user's input as much as possible, which promotes feedback and engagement. So the first thing we need to do is give immediate visual feedback. Whenever the user taps on the screen on anywhere, we should give feedback to the user. And this is what makes it more like a native experience as well. So first, consider the best and worst tap areas. This is really important to consider first, because after a lot of research, we found out that the bottom left to top right is the best area for tapping. It's the most comfortable way to tap on a screen. And the top left corner is the worst place, actually, and Apple still doesn't get that. So we need to understand the best and worst tap areas, and especially for our own app. So we need to test and see what our audience wants. So always give immediate visual feedback and try to respond to the user immediately. Try to respond in under 100 milliseconds if you can. So no matter what the animation or transition speed is, try to start responding in under 100 milliseconds. And also maintain a minimum touch target size of 48 dp, which is density independent pixels. And this is what material design recommends. This is to ensure balanced information density and usability. And we know that small touch targets tend to more frustration, more errors, more problems. The app install banner is a great way to engage with users and get them back to our app as fast as possible. So it has the ability to have your users quickly and seamlessly install your app to their home screen. But only 11% actually accept this home screen app install banner, and the rest, 62%, ignore that. So we need to guide the users, because users are still not really familiar with progressive web apps. They're not familiar that you could actually install your app to their home screen. So we need to guide them. The best way to do this is to add an app install banner signifier, like a button, where the user could click on this button and we could guide them and tell them, this is where you could tap. So this is what Flipkart does. They say, when you tap on that, they say, you could tap here in order to add us to the home screen. Make sure to test this on all browsers, because the overflow menu position could differ on the browser. What we could also do is that after the user adds our app to the home screen, we could also remove that button, so in order to make it more subtle. So we could do that by hiding this button when standalone. So we add a media query, display mode, standalone, and we display none, the button. Another way also to tackle this problem is to delay the app install banner until the user engages with your app. So we know that we cannot control this app install banner yet, but we can delay it. So this is a nice way to do it. We just delay it until after the user, for example here, buys something from Flipkart. So it's more subtle and less annoying. And as I heard in Google I/O conference, soon we'll be able to control this app install banner. So that's good news. Notifications, push notifications, are a great way to also engage with users, and even if the app is closed due to service workers. But it's a tricky way to have a good push notifications. So first, try not to break the user's experience with a push notification. If you have something like an update, you don't have to send a push notification to the user. Maybe you could add like a snack bar in this example. Just say that you could update this PWA by tapping here. So this is a way to notify the user non-disruptively. And there are some guidelines for push notifications to be less annoying. So So for example, a push notification should be personal. It should target the user's needs. It should also be timely. So make sure to work on the time that you send a push notification. It should be relevant. So try not to spam your users with push notifications. And it should be actionable. So you could add some actions to it in order to improve engagement. And it should work offline, and even when the app is closed. So if you want to also take it a bit further, you could give the user control over their push notifications. In this example, you could go into the sidebar and toggle the notifications on and off. And this is a nice way to make the user feel in control. Asking for permissions also can be a hassle because it could be spammy. So we need to work on this. So first, don't ask for permission on the first visit of a website. Because nothing can be more annoying than entering a website and immediately asking for my location, for example, without relevant context, without asking me anything before. So it can confuse users and maybe drive them away from your website. And also, don't use fake Android native banners. I noticed this on Alibaba. They have this PWA, and I noticed that this is not a really native banner. This is a fake one. This is the real one. So they show this, and then they show the native one, which is confusing. And if you're familiar with the native banners, then you'll notice this, and it doesn't really relieve trust to the user. So make sure not to do that. What you can do is ask for permission when it's relevant. So in this example, in SnapWhat, after you go to use my camera, then they will ask you the permission to use your camera. So it's relevant, it makes sense, and it's respectful. When you're doing a PWA, remember that your users will open your app maybe from the home screen, which means the URL bar is not there anymore, which means you should work on providing a share button, an easy way to share your PWA. Luckily, there's a new web share API that is coming soon to the web. And what it does is that when you tap on a share button, it opens the native picker of a share. So then the user will choose from their native apps of where to share this PWA. But this is coming soon. So what we can do meanwhile is implement a share button that lets you copy the URL to the clipboard or also to share from social media. So this is a nice way to give the ability to the users to share your PWA. Since we're talking about engagement and interaction, I'd like to note that the burger menu that you might be using might be hurting your user experience. So here's why. The burger menu may look cleaner because you're hiding stuff inside it, but it has lower discoverability because the users might not notice it the first time. They have to tap first in order for them to see the next sections. It's less efficient because of that extra tap. And the back button for iOS will be reserved for the menu. So it has a clash with platform navigation. Of course, we could move the burger menu and add a back button, but that's not really a good solution. So instead, here are some alternatives. We could use tabs. Tabs are now a design pattern in iOS and Android. So we could use tabs either on the bottom or on the top. And these tabs could also have labels, or they could be just icons. It depends on how uncommon or common your icons are. Of course, some of you might be saying, what if I have more than 5 sections? What happens then? So we could use a tabs with a more option. So this is a better alternative for a burger menu because it's right there. The user would just see the options in front of them and just tap on them. So it's more efficient. So prioritize the 5 most important sections and put them out there, and everything else goes inside more, the less important. These tabs could also be as scrollable tabs, like Google, with the categories. Now, at the end of the day, a burger menu might make sense for certain scenarios. In Uber, everything is provided on the home screen, on the main screen. So we barely go into the burger menu unless we want some secondary options like the history or settings. So this is a great example of using a burger menu. It makes sense. So let's move on to the most important part. A progressive web app should be resilient. It should load instantly, performs fast, and could be connectivity independent. So first, your app should feel local, because 53% of mobile users abandon the site that takes longer than 3 seconds to load, because users are impatient and distracted from everything around them. So we need to work on a very fast first load. Let's take a look at this example. In the normal scenario, when you open a website on mobile, this is what happens. You wait a bit, you wait on a wide screen, you wait a little more, and then everything loads at the same time. So this is normal. The progressive way is to immediately start seeing components after component, and the loader, and then the dynamic component loads at the end. So this progressive way of loading reduces the user's uncertainty and reduces the perception of time, because you will think that the website loaded fast, but actually maybe at the end it's the same time, but just progressively. So the best way to do this is to use the app shell model. So the app shell is the minimum HTML, CSS, and JavaScript that powers the user interface. And here are some examples of an app shell. This is Twitter Lite's app shell. So as you can see, it's very basic. It has the nav bar, some links. This is Google Inbox app shell. And I'm showing you this to tell you that the app shell works everywhere. It's not just a mobile pattern. It should work on all sizes. And this is OutWeb's app shell in action, as we can see. So let's see what are the main components of an app shell. So first we have a nav bar. We have the tab bar, or if you're using a burger menu, you have the sidebar. You have a background color, the loader, and if you have a main action, then you could add it here in the app shell. So another way to work on a very fast load, first load, is to inline some of our SVG icons. So first, as a recommendation, if you have icons on your website, then use SVG icons rather than PNG, because it's very, very small. And if you want to also take it a bit further, you could inline some of these SVG icons. So here's a good example. Inline only the SVG icons above the fold. So when you have icons above the fold on the first main screen that the user sees, then inline those icons, because those icons are the most important icons that the user should see. And if you inline all the icons on your website, then your HTML file will be huge, which defeats the purpose. So that's why we only inline the most important ones. Fonts are one of the most common reasons of a slow load, of a slow first load. So also we need to work on these. So what we can do is remember that web fonts are heavy, but device fonts are weightless. So if you use device fonts on your PWA, they will feel more like home while they're using your PWA. So if you tweak its style to match their operating system, it's a nice way to first have a faster load and to make it more feel like home. So what if there's a way to use Roboto on Android and San Francisco on iOS and Ubuntu font on Ubuntu, etc.? So we can do this, actually. We could add all the fonts of the devices possible as fallbacks. And here, let's say the user is using an Android. What happens is that the browser reads Roboto and ignores everything else. So it's completely weightless. And here's the relevant fonts for each platform or device. So the Apple system is the San Francisco font for Safari. The Blink Mac system font is the equivalent San Francisco for Chrome. And the list goes on. So this is a nice way to use fonts in a completely weightless way. And this is what we get. Medium does this. Medium uses device fonts, like the same way I showed you. And they also use a custom font in other areas. So in this example, on iOS, the same font is San Francisco on iOS, and it's Roboto on Android. Now, if you want to use custom or web fonts, you could preload these fonts, because we know that web fonts are heavy, and they might push away the load of your website. So in normal scenarios, this is what happens. The index.html starts loading, the CSS file loads, and then after the CSS file completely loads, then the fonts start loading. So what we can do is preload these custom fonts. Add a link rel preload with the font as href. I mentioned that it's as font, and also be more specific, type font WOF2, and make sure to add the cross origin, because this is to avoid double requests. And this is what we get. The fonts will simultaneously load with the CSS file. So this avoids the flash of on-style content and avoids blocking the page rendering. Designing for the offline experience is one of the most important parts of a PWA. And not just if it's offline, but also if it has a low internet connectivity. And you might think that there are not a lot of factors for a bad internet connection. Maybe because you live in here or maybe around Europe. But I live in Lebanon. And Lebanon has 1 megabyte per second speed. And we have a lot of problems in the internet, and not just us, but also a lot of other countries. So we need to consider that. So here are some factors of a bad network connection. It could be poor coverage of a provider. And there are lots of scenarios for that. It could have extreme weather conditions. If it's a lot of rain, a lot of thunder, this could affect the internet connection. It could be power outages. Whenever the power is off, the internet is offline as well. And we could be also traveling into dead zones. And that could happen anywhere. When you go into the metro, sometimes the internet is offline. So your goal is to provide a good experience that lessens the impact of changes in this connectivity. So here are some tips. When the app is offline, don't break the user's experience. In this example, as you can see, we're scrolling into products. We click on a product and boom, it gives us the dinosaur. You are offline. So we don't want to break the user's experience like this. So what we can do is first clearly inform the user when a change in state occurs, and try to do that as soon as possible. And not only that, but also inform the user what actions they could do. So here, you seem to have a bad network connection, but don't worry, your messages will be sent when the network is restored. So be transparent with the user and tell them. And when the app is back online, some apps might require auto-updating, like the weather, for example. You can't have old data on a weather app. It has to be updated. So that's why here it makes sense to use auto-updating. And how you deal with informing the user that the app is back online will depend on your app. Another example is to inform the user that there is newer content with a tap to refresh button. When you're reading an article on a blog or a news website, it's really horrible if you auto-update the page and you lose where you were leading. So this is where it makes sense to use a tap to refresh button. Provide an offline experience by default. In this example, we show that the user that the internet is offline. But what you can do is you can access these two categories, and everything else are not really accessible by if it's offline. So it's also a nice way to tell the user that you could access some sections in our app. And if your app doesn't require much data, then you could cache these data by default and try to make the experience as stable as possible. And if your data is heavy, then provide a data saver mode. And the perfect example is Twitter Lite. They have this data saver mode that when you toggle it on, as you can see, the videos and pictures are blurred out, and they're only accessible when you tap on them. And this reduces the data usage by up to 70%, and that's great. You could also give the user control to download for offline uses. In websites like videos, it's really great if we could give the user ability to download offline some specific content like video. And this is an example from the Biograph app. And inform the user when the app is ready for offline consumption. So here in Google I/O, we say caching complete, future visits will work offline. And make sure the language you're using can fit your audience. So for example, this sentence makes sense, but service worker installed successfully is not really a good sentence. So make sure to work on that. You could also give an offline mode to your theme. So we talked about the theme color. It's great if you could add an offline theme color. So in this example, Flipkart, everything blue turns to gray when it's offline. So it's just a beautiful way to show the user that it's offline with only color. So an app that lessens the impact of a network failure will feel magical to the user. So now I'm going to talk about some other design considerations to keep in mind. So first, iOS. We tend to forget that or skip that because it's not really important. But we have to design for iOS fallbacks. So iOS doesn't fully support progressive web apps because they don't support service workers, push notifications, installation to home screen, and does not support manifest.json. So what we can do first is add a launch icon title. So since iOS ignores this manifest.json, we need to add a launch title as a fallback. And by default, iOS sees the title tag in the header, in the head. Another problem we have is the app icon. The app icon on iOS is a screenshot. I don't know why. So what we need to do is have a fallback for this. So we specify a web app icon like this. A link rel Apple Touch icon with the icon. We can also hide Safari UI components by adding this Apple mobile web app capable meta tag. And this is a very dangerous and powerful meta tag. Here's why. First, iOS doesn't have a hardware back button. We know that, which means if you enter a website and doesn't have a back button, you're stuck there forever. So another problem is some links might open in a browser in a PWA. If you open a PWA from the home screen and you tap on a product, in some scenarios, it will open the browser, Safari. And this is not a really good experience. So here's the first solution. We could add back navigations everywhere on all pages. And we use location.href instead of the A for internal navigation. And this is what avoids opening in a browser, open the links in browser. The other solution is to just avoid the web app capable meta tag. And the perfect example is Twitter. They don't have this web app capable meta tag. When you open it from the home screen, it opens the browser. And this is okay for now until Apple fixes it. You could keep the icon and title as meta tags and just remove the web app capable meta tag for now. It avoids the UX problems that you might counter. If you want to use web app capable, then you could also make it a bit more like a native app. So you could change the status bar appearance. So you could do that by Apple Mobile Web App status bar style. And this is the default color. It's white. We have another one, which is black. And the third one is black translucent. And what this does is that it floats on top of the full screen content instead of pushing it down. So we need to design for that. We need to either push our content accordingly or make our nav bar bigger. So despite the fact that iOS doesn't yet support progressive web apps, there are lots of brands and companies that have a lot of great improvements in iOS. For example, AliExpress saw an 82% increase in iOS conversion. And the Washington Post has seen a near 5 times increase in user engagement on iOS. And I think that's due to the best practices for performance, a faster load, and just a smoother experience overall. And the Washington Post has also a combination of a PWA and AMP, which allowed to offer a game-changing experience. And this is the difference between a current mobile web and their instant mobile web. So another thing to consider is to design for accessibility and low-end devices. This might be a challenge, and we might skip that usually. But remember that 49 million people suffer from accessibility and disability problems like mobility, hearing, and eyesight. And since we're doing a PWA that works everywhere, why not make it work with everyone? So it might be a challenge, but if you design inclusively, you design for everyone. So be aware of global accessibility, of colorblind people, low-end devices, expensive data in some countries. So what we can do is be globally relevant using icons and friendly English language. So use simple global English language that can work for all people or uneducated people. And be culturally relevant. Use fewer words, more icons, in order to be more visible. Also, consider high data cost and low-end phones. So we could solve this by reducing our app size, which we already do in a PWA, and consider the small screen sizes as well. You could also minimize the battery usage and let them know about data costs. So when they're downloading something for offline use, for example, show them the megabyte size of this thing that they're downloading. And also remember that your PWA is going to be used on a mobile phone, which means it might going to be used on an outdoor use. So make sure to have sufficient contrast for that. And also consider that some users will have low vision, which means also you need to have more contrast. You could also use some colorblind simulation filters and try not to rely on color alone. You could see the device sizes, the colors on material.io/color. So the last thought that I want to leave you with is, should I design separately for iOS and Android? Most progressive web apps design one app that works everywhere. But some companies and some brands, like Barcelona City app, they tweak their design for one for Android and another for iOS. So it really depends on your requirements, on your needs and apps and audience. So the takeaway of this talk would be, first, to take inspiration from native apps. So forget the web-like experience and design for an app-like experience. Also, test on the crappiest device you could find with remote debugging and make sure your app works good everywhere. And apply checklists, just like this one, for your PWA in order to create truly amazing experiences on the web. If you want to know more about progressive web apps design and user experience, the best place to find all these is on Google Web Fundamentals. So I hope you enjoyed the talk. Make sure to follow me on Twitter because I'm going to be tweeting the slides later on. And I'd love to answer your questions if you have any. Thank you.